The Galactic Federation had ruled the stars for millennia, an ancient council of species bound by mutual interest, diplomacy, and the quiet assurance that war was a relic of less civilized times. They had fought before, certainly, pirates, rogue warlords, and the occasional insurgent rebellion, but never anything that truly threatened the order of things. Their fleets, vast and gleaming, were built not for conquest but deterrence, and their doctrine assumed that reason and overwhelming force could resolve any conflict before it began. Then, humanity arrived. It started as an unintentional border breach. A deep space probe, primitive by Federation standards, drifted into a restricted system, scanning with an audacity that suggested either ignorance or arrogance. Federation protocol dictated a measured response. Send a diplomatic envoy, establish controlled contact, and determine whether these newcomers could be guided into the fold. The Federation's Inner Council reviewed the preliminary assessments of humanity and found them unimpressive. A young species, barely a few centuries into spaceflight, with a fractured planetary history steeped in violence. Their homeworld was overpopulated, polluted, and frequently at war with itself. Their technology was crude, functional but inelegant. Ambassador Vrail of the Seraph Collective was chosen to deliver the Federation's offer. He arrived in the Sol system aboard the Celestial Accord, a diplomatic cruiser that bristled with enough concealed weaponry to remind the humans of their place. He had studied their psychological profiles, noting their tendency toward aggression, their tribalism, their history of empire and conquest. He saw no reason to expect difficulty. The Federation had encountered hundreds of species before, and the process was always the same. They would offer humanity the chance to join peacefully, to share in the prosperity of the greater galactic order, or they would subdue them effortlessly and impose order. It was, in Vrail's mind, a courtesy. The humans met them in orbit above Earth, sending a single warship to dock with the Celestial Accord. It was a crude design, armored in overlapping plates of dark metal, the hull scarred and functional rather than polished. The delegation that boarded was small, 3 humans in dark uniforms, their insignia stark against the matte black of their suits. Their leader, identified as Admiral Elias Roth, was a man of middle years with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat opposite Vrail in the negotiation chamber, expression unreadable. Vrail delivered the Federation's message in calm, measured tones. The Federation would welcome humanity as a vassal species. They would be granted access to limited technology, provided they adhered to the laws of the Council and submitted to oversight. Their independence, of course, would be largely symbolic, but in time they would see the wisdom of integration. The humans listened without interruption. They showed no visible reaction, no flash of outrage or offense, no disbelief at the audacity of the demand. When Vrail finished, Roth simply leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. No, Vrail's crest flared in irritation. This is not a negotiation, Admiral Roth. It is an offer of protection. The alternative is war. Roth finished for him. His voice was flat, his gaze steady. You think this is the first time someone's tried to take what's ours? You think we're scared of you? Vrail forced himself to remain composed. He had expected some resistance. He had not expected this absolute, unshaken confidence. He glanced at the other 2 humans. Their expressions were the same, calm, assessing, unafraid. You misunderstand, he said carefully. This is not a matter of fear. It is a matter of inevitability. You cannot fight us. We have crushed empires. We have rewritten the histories of entire civilizations. We do not destroy needlessly, but we will bring order to chaos. And humanity as it stands is chaos. Roth exhaled through his nose, something like amusement flickering in his gaze. Then come and take it. The humans stood as one, their movements precise, controlled. They left without another word, vanishing into the corridors of the ship like wraiths. Vrail watched them go, unsettled in a way he could not name. It was not their words that unnerved him, nor their defiance. It was the complete and utter certainty, with which they had rejected his offer, as if they had already seen the future and knew exactly how it would unfold. The Federation responded as expected. A task force was dispatched, not to annihilate, but to demonstrate overwhelming superiority. A single battle group, led by the dreadnought Verdict of Stars, with orders to neutralize Earth's orbital defenses and force compliance. It was a standard maneuver, one that had succeeded 100 times before. The fleet entered Sol space without resistance. Their scanners swept the system, identifying defense platforms, planetary shield arrays, and primitive human warships. The fleet admiral broadcast a final warning, giving Earth one last chance to surrender. The humans did not respond. Instead, the Verdict of Stars suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Power grids flickered and died. Its targeting system scrambled by a virus that had infiltrated their network before they had even realized they were under attack. The dreadnought was a fortress, a marvel of Federation engineering, but its own mass became its downfall. Its engines, forced into an uncontrolled burn, sent it into a collision course with one of its own escorts. The resulting explosion tore through the formation, and before the Federation could recover, the humans struck. They did not fight like the Federation. There were no grand fleet engagements, no elegant formations. Human ships moved unpredictably, their weapons firing in coordinated salvos that exploited every vulnerability. They ignored standard battle doctrine, using their own ships as battering rams when necessary, boarding enemy vessels in brutal close-quarters combat that left entire crews slaughtered. Within hours, the Federation's fleet was in disarray. Within a day, it was annihilated. A single cruiser was allowed to escape, its sole purpose to deliver a message. The Federation listened in stunned silence as the human admiral's voice echoed across the council chambers. "You came here thinking we were weak, that we were something to be tamed. You sent a fleet to humble us, and we burned it from the sky. You have only two choices now: leave us alone or come in force. But know this: if you come again, we will not stop at your fleets. We will not stop at your worlds. We will burn everything. We will teach the galaxy what happens when you make an enemy of humanity." The transmission ended. The chamber remained silent for long, breathless moments. The Federation had never encountered anything like this before. Species had resisted before, but they had always broken in the end, cowed by superior force, by the crushing weight of inevitability. But the humans had no such concept. They did not see inevitability as a law of nature. They saw it as something to be broken. For the first time in its long and illustrious history, the Federation understood fear. The Federation's response was swift, decisive, and doomed from the start. Humanity's destruction had become a matter of necessity, not just for vengeance but for survival. If left unchecked, this savage species would upend the fragile peace that had governed the stars for millennia. The Federation's High Council mobilized an armada unlike any seen in centuries. 200 warships, led by the battleship Eternal Balance, their orders clear: crush Earth before its influence could spread. Admiral Ross stood aboard the bridge of the UNS Leviathan, watching the incoming fleet on the holo display. The sheer scale of it was staggering, a wall of gleaming ships moving with the slow, inevitable force of an avalanche. Any rational force would have surrendered, but humanity had never been rational in the way the galaxy understood. "Status?" Roth asked. Commander Kieran Vasquez, his chief strategist, exhaled sharply. "They're in standard battle formation. Shields at full, weapons primed. No deviation, no surprises." Roth nodded. The Federation always fought by the book. Doctrine dictated superiority through numbers, precision, and control. But books didn't win wars. Ruthlessness did. "Execute the Ghost Protocol," he said. Across the fleet, human ships shut down active transmissions, their systems going dark. From the Federation's perspective, the battlefield suddenly went silent. No energy signatures, no movement, just drifting wreckage where ships had been. Confused, the Eternal Balance hesitated, scanning for signs of deception. It was their last mistake. From the darkness, missiles lanced out like spears, guided by pre-programmed attack vectors. They struck shields already under strain from constant scanning, overloading defenses in a cascade of energy. Before the enemy could react, human ships reappeared, engines flaring as they burst into motion at impossible angles. They did not engage in clean, organized formations. They swarmed, closed distance rapidly, boarded enemy vessels in brutal skirmishes that left Federation soldiers overwhelmed. The Leviathan moved through the chaos like a predator, its railguns tearing through armor, its drop pods launching strike teams directly into enemy ships. The Federation, so used to controlled engagements, faltered. Their command structure began to crumble. Aboard the Eternal Balance, Grand Admiral Tavash watched in disbelief as the battle disintegrated into slaughter. This wasn't just unconventional warfare. It was something else entirely. There was no restraint, no diplomacy, no interest in containment. Humanity did not seek victory. They sought annihilation. He activated an emergency transmission. All forces regroup. Fall back to Sector 9. The transmission cut to static. A human strike team had breached the command center. The last thing Tavash saw was the glint of a blade before the feed went dark. Within hours, the Armada was no more. Survivors fled in scattered groups, some managing to reach distant outposts, their accounts near incoherent. They spoke of ships that moved like ghosts, of soldiers who fought like demons, of tactics that ignored all reason. They spoke of humans who did not take prisoners. The Federation recoiled. Every species had its myths. Old stories of ancient horrors that had been defeated long before the current order was established. But now the stories took a new form, and the name whispered in fear was humanity. Roth and his commanders did not celebrate. They had won the battle, but war was not about battles. War was about breaking an enemy so completely they never dared rise again. And so humanity did what no species before had considered. They did not wait for the next attack. They became the aggressors. The first planetary assault came without warning. The colony of Varric Prime was a strategic hub, home to 20 million and a key supply line for Federation forces. Human warships descended in silence, deploying ground teams before orbital defenses had even been activated. The resistance was valiant but hopeless. The Federation's soldiers had been trained for conventional warfare, for clear objectives and rules of engagement. The humans had no rules. They used chemical weapons to suffocate bunkers, electromagnetic pulses to disable enemy defenses, and firebombs to reduce cities to ash. The first broadcast came a day after the invasion. A Federation senator, bound and beaten, delivered humanity's message to the galaxy. This is not negotiation. This is consequence. The feed cut to black. One by one, worlds fell. Some fought and were erased. Others surrendered and were left in ruin anyway, warnings for those who still harbored defiance. Panic spread like wildfire. Federation leaders who had once spoken with absolute confidence now whispered of evacuation, of retreat. For the first time in history, species that had stood as allies for centuries turned on each other, blaming one another for the catastrophe. On the battlefield, humanity's reputation only grew darker. Stories of atrocities spread. Civilians used as shields, entire populations forced to watch as their leaders were executed. Some were exaggerations. Others were not. Roth did not care. We didn't start this war, he reminded his officers. But we'll be the ones to end it. Not all humans agreed. Dissent grew in the ranks. Some believed they had gone too far, that vengeance had become cruelty. Among them was Captain Elise Marrow, a rising figure in the fleet, respected and feared in equal measure. One night, she confronted Roth in his quarters. "How much further does this go?" she demanded. "Do we just keep burning everything until there's nothing left?" Roth regarded her carefully. "They would have done the same to us. Maybe, but we're the ones writing history now. Do we want to be remembered as the ones who broke the galaxy? He did not answer, because in truth, he did not know if the galaxy had been broken or if it had simply revealed its true nature. Reports arrived of mass evacuations from the remaining Federation strongholds. They were running. That should have been the end of it. But the war had taken on a life of its own, and humanity had learned a lesson it would never forget. Fear was the only thing that lasted, and so the fleet pressed on. The Federation's last strongholds burned, their proud banners reduced to drifting embers in the void. The war was no longer a war. It was an inevitability, a slow, methodical collapse of everything the galaxy had once known. The names of fallen worlds became whispers in the dark, spoken only in fear. The great exodus had begun. Civilian ships clogged the hyperlanes, entire species fleeing to the farthest reaches of space, hoping to escape the wrath of the one species that had proven itself unstoppable. Yet for all their terror, the Federation still clung to life. Their capital world, Erithus Prime, remained untouched, its defenses reinforced by the last remnants of their once mighty fleets. The world was a fortress, wrapped in planetary shields thick enough to withstand prolonged bombardment, surrounded by orbital weapons platforms that could turn lesser fleets to dust. It was here the Federation would make its final stand, not out of hope for victory, but because there was nowhere left to run. Admiral Roth studied the projected battle map from the bridge of the Leviathan, his expression carved from stone. The Federation had concentrated everything here. Over 100 warships, planetary defense grids, and ground armies numbering in the millions. It was the largest force they had mustered since the war began. He could almost admire their persistence. "They're out of options," said Commander Vasquez, arms crossed. "They know they can't win, but they'll make us bleed for it." Roth nodded. "Then we make it quick." The order was given. The sky ignited as humanity's fleet descended, weapons flaring against the defenses of the last civilized world in the galaxy. The battle that followed was unlike any that had come before. The Federation did not retreat. There was no surrender, no desperate pleas for peace. Their ships met the assault with unrelenting fire. Their soldiers fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. The planetary shields held against the first wave of bombardments, absorbing energy that could have shattered entire moons. Then came the second wave. Humanity did not break the shields. They bypassed them. Ground teams landed in high-speed drop pods, piercing through gaps in the defenses, deploying soldiers directly into the heart of the capital. Cities became war zones. Streets ran red with the blood of those who refused to bow. The Federation's elite forces fought with discipline and courage, but it was not enough. They had spent too long believing war was something fought with honor, with treaties and rules. Humanity had no such illusions. Captain Elise Merrow led the assault on the Federation's Central Command bunker, moving through the ruins of what had once been a city of towering spires and glass-lit avenues. Now, it was rubble. Flames crackled in the distance, smoke blackening the sky. Civilians huddled in the wreckage, their faces hollow with despair. She ignored them. There was no room for hesitation. Not now. Her strike team breached the outer gates, cutting through the last of the defenders. The doors to the bunker were thick, reinforced against orbital bombardment. It took 3 explosive charges to breach them. When they finally collapsed inward, revealing the last of the Federation's leadership, the air was thick with dust and the stink of desperation. High Chancellor Orlon stood among his advisors, his regal robe stained with sweat, his once commanding presence reduced to a trembling figure grasping at the last shreds of dignity. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice hoarse. "Humanity has won. The Federation is no more." Merrow leveled her rifle. "We don't leave loose ends." A single shot rang out, and the Federation died with its leader. Outside, the battle was over. The last warships had fallen silent, their wreckage drifting lifelessly in orbit. On the surface, the last soldiers laid down their arms, surrendering to an enemy that would grant them no mercy. The streets of the capital were silent. Admiral Roth, received the final report with the same cold efficiency that had carried him through the war. He stood at the bridge of his flagship, staring down at the conquered world, knowing what came next. A transmission was sent across the surviving worlds, a message that would be etched into the fabric of history. This war began because you thought humanity was weak. You thought we could be tamed, controlled, crushed beneath the weight of your order. You were wrong. The Federation is no more. Your leaders are dead. Your armies are dust. This is the only warning you will ever receive. Should any of you rise against us, should any of you seek vengeance, we will return. And next time, there will be nothing left. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, those who heard it did not doubt its meaning. The war was over, but its echoes would never fade. The war had ended, but the blood had not yet dried. The ruins of the Federation's last stronghold still smoldered, its cities reduced to charred skeletons of steel and stone. Across the conquered worlds, silence reigned where once there had been defiance. There were no uprisings, no whispers of rebellion, only the quiet, suffocating weight of fear. From the bridge of the Leviathan, Admiral Roth watched as the last remnants of the old order were swept away. The galaxy had belonged to the Federation for millennia, its laws absolute, its rule unquestioned. Now, those who had once spoken of peace and diplomacy cowered in the shadows, waiting to see what kind of masters humanity would become. "Status report," Roth said. Commander Vasquez exhaled, scanning the fleet-wide transmissions. "Secured all major trade lanes. Most surviving species are complying with the occupation terms. A few outliers refusing to acknowledge authority, but nothing organized." Roth nodded. "And the Purge?" Vasquez hesitated. Ahead of schedule, the Purge. That was what they were calling it now. The systematic dismantling of any last traces of resistance, the removal of those who might one day rise against them. It had started with the remnants of the Federation's military, then the bureaucrats, the scholars, the thinkers who had once shaped the old order. Now, it was spreading to anyone suspected of harboring defiance. Captain Elise Merrow had seen enough. She stood at the command console, her jaw clenched as Vasquez read the report. She had been there when the war began, had fought in the fires of its bloodiest battles. She had believed in what they were doing, at least at first. But this was something else. "This isn't war," she said. "This is extermination." Roth regarded her calmly, as if he had expected this conversation. "You think we should show them mercy? I think we've already won." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "We don't need to keep killing them just to make a point. The point," Roth said, "is that fear lasts longer than force. They won't rise against us if they believe there's nothing left to rise for." Merrow's fingers curled into fists. "And what happens when the fear fades? When they realize they have nothing left to lose?" Roth didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of something unspoken. Merrow knew then that nothing she said would change his mind. Roth had led them to victory, but he had lost something along the way, something essential. He was no longer a soldier. He was something colder, something harder. And he wasn't alone. Across the conquered worlds, humanity's rule was absolute. Governors were installed, laws rewritten. Species that had once ruled themselves now found their cultures dismantled, their histories rewritten, their futures dictated by human hands. There was no rebellion. Not yet. But Merrow could see the embers beneath the surface, smoldering in the eyes of the conquered. In the shadows, voices began to stir. Smugglers, dissidents, survivors who had escaped the purge. They spoke of what had been lost, of what could still be reclaimed. The war was over, but something new was beginning. A resistance, quiet and unseen, waiting for the moment to strike. Merrow stood at the viewport of her quarters, staring at the endless black beyond the fleet. She had fought to save humanity. Now, she wondered if she would have to fight to save the galaxy from them. She didn't know how this would end, but she knew it wasn't over.